Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series of the climate change program. This one, I'm delighted to talk about climate change impact on agriculture and its impact on climate change, as well as looking at how electronics can help mitigate that problem. And I will talk briefly in terms of logistics. For those of you that have joined, we are recording this webinar for on-demand playback at a later time. I encourage you to tell your colleagues, your friends, your family to please register, and we'll access the on-demand recording at a later time once it's available. Please, we encourage discussion, your questions, your comments. Post them on the Q&A portion of the Zoom webinar that is located at the bottom of your screen. For any technical difficulties or basic questions, please post in the chat window. We will be monitoring both the Q&A as well as the chat. Now I will turn it over to Ritambara. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, ma'am. Good afternoon, good morning to all guests from TAB committee. Our today exemplary speaker, Dr. Victor from Synopsys R&D Chile. So with this, moving towards the webinar series, may I request Ramlata ma'am, who is the driving force behind this webinar series, to kindly introduce about the TAB and this webinar series program.
Yeah, thank you, Ritambara. So TAB Climate Change Program has been started because the climate change is a potential threat to the whole world. And though all the governments, industries, technical organizations, social enterprises, and others are talking about this, it is important to know how, as an individual, we are embracing the way of environmental protection. So under the TAB Climate Change Program Ad hoc Committee, there is an education subcommittee for which I'm the lead. And under this education subcommittee, we have introduced the Save the Humanity, Sustain the Climate webinar series. So this Save the Humanity, Sustain the Climate webinar series, the topics of the series focus on reducing the multifold impacts of the climate change. For example, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, promoting sustainable living practices, and fostering resilience in communities. All these positive as well as negative topics are to be made aware to the broader audience, and that is the reason we have brought out this SHSC, Save the Humanity, Sustain the Climate webinar series. So as such, this series brings forth awareness on climate change, climate emergency, and climate actions. So this is the second webinar of the SHSC series. I'm so happy Dr. Victor has agreed to be a part of this webinar series. Welcome, Victor. Over to you. Thank you, Ritambara, for calling me and giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for your wonderful words. It is rightly said by Barack Obama that we are the first generation to see the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. It is really related with this SHSC program. With this, may I request Dr. Victor to kickstart the session. But before the kicking start of the session, I am briefly introducing Dr. Victor. So Dr. Victor has an engineering diploma in microelectronics from Institut Nestlé Polytechnique, France, and an electronic engineering diploma from University Technica Sant Maria Chile. He got his PhD on electronics in 2021 from University of Bordeaux. He is currently R&D Group Director and General Manager at Synopsys Chile. He has published several papers in IoT, EDA, smart agriculture, and embedded system development Since 2012, he is a chair of IEEE Chilean chapter of CASS. He has been part of several committees, including ISCAS, ICECAS, LASCAS, and steering committees. He is a senior member of IEEE. He is member of IEEE CAS Board of Governors for 2021 to 2023. He founded the Electronics for Agri-Food SIG at CAS and chairs it. He was chair of LASCA's steering committee from 2018 to 2022. He is CAS representative at IEEE Climate Change tab. He was president of Chilean Electronic and Electrical Industry Association, that is AIE, from 2017 to 2021. From 2006 to 2008, he was member of Chilean Offshoring Committee, organized by Ministry of Economic of Chile. In 2010, he was awarded as Innovator of the Year in Services Export. In 2022, he was awarded as IEEE Best Engineer in Chile. In 2023, he was awarded as IEEE Region 9 Outstanding Engineer. Victor's research area are EDA, that is Electronic Design, Automation, Climate Change, and Smart Agriculture. With this note, may I request Dr. Victor to kindly share his view on climate change impact on agriculture and agriculture impact on climate change and how electronics can help to mitigate it. Thank you, sir, and thank you. Now I welcome you. And we all are really thankful to sparing your valuable time with us.
I would like to make a disclaimer at the beginning. This is a very wide and large topic. Agriculture is very large, and climate change as well. So I will provide a good, I would say, overview, and I will probably go in deeper details on my specialization area, which is the crops growing. So when we talk about agriculture is a very large topic. So my specialization is on crops and crops on the land, which is not crops on the greenhouses. So just this kind of disclaimer. So let's go into that. And okay, so my outline for today's talk will be a little the carbon cycle and the climate change, just to be sure that we are all talking in the same topic, and we all understand exactly what is happening. And after, we are going to talk about the impact of climate change on agriculture, and then we are going to do the reverse impact of agriculture on climate change, and there we are going to try to talk about what electronics and technology can do. And finally, I would like to do some brainstorming and discussion. I will provide some ideas, and I hope you will be having a lot of ideas, questions, comments, because this is a very dynamic topic that is changing on a daily basis. So let's start with that. So with the carbon cycle and the climate change. So the carbon cycle is, the natural process in which carbon moves through the earth and its ecosystem. Okay, it's the nature's way of recycling carbon atoms. The carbon cycle describes the continuous travel of carbon atoms from the earth to the atmosphere and vice versa. And it has four main steps. The first one is the carbon sequestration. It occurs when plants and other photosynthetic organisms convert the CO2 from the atmosphere in glucose that is used for their food and to form also other organic molecules. The second part of the carbon cycle is the respiration and decomposition. So living organisms, including ourselves, plants, animals, and so on, release CO2 through respiration. The decomposition of organic matters is also releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. You have the third part of the carbon cycle, which is the fossil fuel combustion. The burning of fossil fuels, such as the oil, the coal, the gas, and so on, release largest amount of CO2 into the atmosphere. And this is one of the main problems we are seeing today, and we are going to talk about a little about that. And finally, the carbon deposition, which is the carbon that is deposited in the earth through processes such as sedimentation and mineralization. So the remains of dead organism are converted into fossil fuels and other carbon deposits through geological processes. So this is what we see there, and we can look that in a graphic way. So we have the carbon cycle where we have the photosynthesis. So we take the CO2 from the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, we generate the oxygen and some and also food for the vegetables and all the things on the earth. Those organisms will, when they die or when they are waste products, will also produce fossil and fossil fuels. And we have the animal respiration that is releasing CO2. You have the plant respiration that is also releasing CO2 to the atmosphere. And we have this part which is the factories and all that are auto and factory emissions that are also releasing CO2 to the atmosphere. What are the greenhouse gases? Because we talk about the greenhouse gases effect and so on. There is 4 main types of greenhouse gases. The first one is the carbon dioxide. This is the most significant greenhouse gas emitted by human activities. It's released through the burning of fossil fuels, and it's also released by deforestation. And we are going to talk about deforestation later in this presentation. But deforestation is also becoming very, very important on that. The methane, the CH4, is a result from natural processes, decay of organic matter in wetland, and it's also human activities, livestock farming. We are talking a lot about meat and how we produce meat and what is happening with the cows and all that. And we are going to analyze a little that problem about the livestock farming and the methane emission. Coal mining and the extraction and transportation of natural gas, of course. We also have the nitrous oxide, primarily emitted by agriculture and industrial activities, synthetic fertilizers, burning of fossil fuels and industrial processes. And finally, we have the fluorinated gases that includes various synthetic gases, and you see some names there that are used in industrial applications. So there are other, but those are the most important greenhouse gases that we are trying to measure and to, of course, to change and to decrease, so there is less impact on that. The carbon balance, it's also important to understand, it refers to the chemical equilibrium that exists between the carbon dioxide and the living organism that use it to photosynthesize and release oxygen. The carbon balance should be maintained when the amount, it's maintained when the amount of CO2 released into the atmosphere is balanced by the amount of CO2 absorbed by photosynthesis and all the biological process. And what is happening today is that human activities have increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it leads to an increase in global temperature due to this greenhouse effect, because to keep the balance, so we are having more CO2 in the atmosphere, we have this greenhouse effect, which is protecting it's not going over, and we don't have enough zinc to capture that, so it is increasing the temperature. CO2 emissions today, so we have the 3 main producer of emission of CO2, the biofuel, the oil, the coal, and the gas, and you see that we have been increasing that dramatically over from the 1850 to today. And the other thing is where this is coming from. This is very important to understand where it's coming from. And that was one of the reasons that last year at COP27, one of the discussion was about how much money the North Hemisphere countries were going to put into the South Hemisphere countries, which are the countries that are suffering the most, or the poor countries that are suffering the most emissions that are produced by the more developed countries. So this is a very important discussion that started a long time ago. Last year, they decided to put some money on the table. Now it seems that we are going, we are defining the amount of money and how it will be delivered. So now the question is, why temperature rise? So the Earth's temperature is affected by the so-called greenhouse effect. So the temperature depends on the balance between energy entering and leaving the planet system. And this is what is happening. When sunlight reaches the Earth's surface, it can either be reflected back into space or absorbed by the Earth. Incoming energy that is absorbed by the Earth warms the planet. once absorbed, the planet releases some of the energy back into the atmosphere as heat. And this is produced, of course, by the presence of certain gases in the atmosphere, so carbon dioxide, which trap the sun heat and retain in the atmosphere. So when the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere increases, more heat is retained in the atmosphere, leading to an increase in global temperature. Other greenhouse gases such as methane and nitrous oxide also contribute to this effect. But this is exactly what happened. And it is already accepted. There's still some people saying that it's not true, that temperature increase is correlated with CO2 concentration. And this is not the first time we have witnessed a high concentration of CO2. However, it is the first time humans have been present on the Earth. It is an anthropogenic process. So we are creating, we humans, we are creating this high concentration of CO2 today. Emissions are generally expressed in CO2 equivalent amount, having the same warming effect over the 100-year period. And this is very interesting what I have found. So in August 1912, we were already talking about the coal consumption that will affect the climate. So we are talking about a century ago that it was already there. Climate change had been strongly correlated with change in CO2 in the past. So today, what we are seeing, and this is part of this article from 1912, we are seeing the CO2 concentration are anthropogenic. And data and temperature on CO2 concentration now and in the past are very consistent. Whenever the CO2 increased, the temperature increased. And the current global warming as was predicted more than a century ago. And here we have some data on temperature and CO2 now and in the past, and they are very consistent. You can see 400,000 years ago or 400,000 years before Christ, you have this augmentation on CO2, and immediately you have the temperature going up. So it has been demonstrated from a scientific point of view that there is a correlation between CO2 and temperature, and it is consistent over the years. The main difference is that we are present right now. So humans are present right now, and this is the main difference to what happened in the past. So emission per sector. What are the sectors that are doing that? Okay, the first one is energy. And of course, we can talk a lot about energy, and we have this all these kind of things that are renewable energies and all that are in the process, the green hydrogen as a energy as well, but energy is the one that is doing the most emission. And the second one, agriculture. Second one is agriculture. And if we also add agriculture to the land use change and forestry, which is in some way related, and we will see why, we are having an important part coming from these two sectors. Industrial is, yes, it's part of that, but you see that industrial is much smaller than agriculture. Agriculture, and we will see later, is one of the, after energy, of course, is one of the important parts. And the waste. Waste is also producing some emissions, and it's part of the problem. And the global primary energy consumption by source, we can see here how oil, coal, and all that has been increasing over the years, and how we are doing some, and how this is part of the problem we are seeing today. So this is just an overview to try to work together and to have the same view of the problem. So now, what is the impact of climate change in agriculture? Why we are talking about it? So the first thing we are going to cover in that part is why it is important, because you can tell me why we care about that. The second one, we are going to talk about the water problem, the food security, the impact on crops, livestock, and fisheries, the United Nations analysis, and what electronics and technology can do, which is important that we talk about. So impact of climate change, why it is important. So the first consideration is the population of the world is increasing. We are increasing. Even if the growth rate is decreasing, we are having more and more people here. More people implies more food, and more food implies more agriculture. And if we continue in the same way, more agriculture implies more emissions. So we have an enormous problem there. So the second problem is the arable land, meaning the land that can be allocated to produce food is decreasing. Okay, when you say arable land, we are mostly talking about crops. We are not talking about livestock. It's crops, vegetables, fruits, and all that, because this is the land that is arable. So the hectare per person went from 0.35 from 1965. Now we are close to the 0.2. So there is less and less space to produce food. And you are seeing in several places of the world things like the vertical agriculture, and they are putting things on the roof of the big buildings and so on. So we are trying to also make changes in that part because there is less and less land to use. The second problem, or the third problem, we see that according to United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, they say for 2050, current agricultural production needs to be increased by 70%. And it has to be sustainable, by the way. So here we see this dilemma, how we increase the production of food being sustainable. Because if not, we are going to do more and more emissions, and we are going to make the problem even more complicated. The second important thing, or the third, I don't know, but this is very important to understand. Because when we talk about technology on the agriculture, the smart agriculture and all that, we have to consider that 80% worldwide of farms operate on less than 2 hectares of land. So we are talking about a small farm, very, very small, and about 500 million farms are smaller than 2 hectares. And they produce the majority of the food are produced by these farms. In the poorest countries, 70% of land is operated by farmers smaller than 5 hectares. And of course, those small farmers are not adopting technology. It is too expensive. If you consider satellites and drone and all that, it is too expensive. It's hard to use. It is very hard to use for the, you can, I don't know, in my country, in Chile, which is not on the poorest country, but it's a country going to development. If you go to the land, if you go to the field, if you go to that place and you discuss with farmers, they don't even know how, they know how to use maybe some kind of WhatsApp or messaging. They know how to use Facebook. They have a cell phone, and that's it. Don't start asking them to start using some Excel spreadsheet or something more complicated. It is hard to use, and they don't have digital skills in general. I have discussed with several people from underdeveloped countries or countries that are going to develop, and we have the same problem. And there is another problem there. This is the communication availability and cost. So we talk a lot about 5G. 5G will be important to go on that, etc., etc. But there are places where you don't have even 1G. If you go to the land, if you go to the field, and you have no communication at all. So, and if you have, it is very expensive. So you can produce a lot of technology, but if we don't produce a very low cost, low power technology, they are not going to use. So this is also a very important parameter we have to consider that. Okay. So the water problem, that's another problem because water and climate change are linked. Climate change affects water in different ways. Unpredictable rainfalls, and we are seeing that every day on the news. Shrinking of ice sheets, we are also seeing that. Rising sea levels, this is very, very critical for also the floods and the drought. So climate change is exacerbating the water scarcity and water-related hazard. So we have because water is one of the most important things for agriculture, and climate change is exacerbating the scarcity of that. And the fresh water, that is also very surprising. 70% of blue water withdrawals from water course and groundwater are destined to agricultural usage. If you see the first line, worldwide, 70% of the water is going to agriculture. You know, there are a lot of people saying, no, the industry is the big usage of water. No, it is exactly the agriculture. Europe is very well balanced because you have almost 30% for agriculture, 30% for domestic, and 30% for industry, something like that. But if you go, okay, if you go to Asia is almost 75 or almost 80%. South America is 50%. So the water is, Africa is more than 60%. So the water is very important for agriculture. And the agricultural global water demand is estimated to increase by 19% by 2050. We want to increase productivity, we need more water. So this is the reason that we say that it is going to increase. So the water scarcity, 2 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water. Half of the world population is experiencing severe water scarcity. Only 0.5% of water on Earth is usable and available fresh water. It's a very small amount of water, you know. Water supply stored in glacier and snow are projected to further decline. Sea level rise is projected to extend salinization of groundwater. And it's very important because, you know, the salinization it's not only produce that we have less fresh water availability, but also when the salinization is too high on the land, the crops needs more energy to take the water. So you can irrigate, and if there's too much salinization, the crops will not grow. Water quality is also affected by climate change, pollution, of course. And the last part, it takes between 2,000 and 5,000 liters of water to produce a person daily food. So you see, it's a huge number of that. Okay, climate change has made extreme weather events more severe. Rising global temperature increase the moisture of the atmosphere can hold. So this is more storm and heavy rains and more intense dry spells. And by the way, it is important to understand that heavy rains is not good for agriculture. It's not good at all. So some people can say, but we have more water. Yes, we have more water. Today, we are having the same amount of rain that was maybe in a week in the past. Today, it's maybe in 1 hour. This is not good at all for agriculture. Drought and flood risk, water-related disasters have dominated the list of disasters over the past 50 years and account for 70% of all deaths related to natural disasters. And since 2000, flood-related disasters have risen by 134%. So it is creating a big problem. Next problem we have, food security. So food security has been defined a long time ago in 1996. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preference for an active and healthy life. That was defined, as I say, 1996. It has 4 dimensions: the food availability, which is the availability of sufficient quantities of food of appropriate quality, supplied through domestic production or import. And please, when we think about that, just remember the problem with the oil, the increase of the oil we use for salads and for cooking because of the Ukraine and Russia war. Just remember that. The price increased immediately, so there were a problem with the food availability. Food access by individuals to adequate resources for acquiring appropriate foods for a nutritious diet. Utilization of food through adequate diet, clean water, sanitation, and healthcare to reach a state of nutritional well-being. And finally, stability. It has to be stable. To be food secure, a population, household, or individual must have access to adequate food at all times. It's not that today you have food, tomorrow you don't, and after tomorrow you have. It has to be stable. Okay, so, okay, yeah, the increased frequency and so the climate change impact on food security, the increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather is impacting the food security and livelihoods. Annual occurrence of disasters is now more than 3 times that it was in the 70s and the 80s. The agriculture absorbed the disproportionate share of 63% of impact from disaster, affecting mostly the least developed countries and the low-income countries. And the impact of natural disaster caused the agricultural sector of developing countries over 108 billion in damage of or lost crop and livestock production. And this is the reason we are also talking how to compensate those countries from the countries that are doing the emissions. The drought is the single greatest culprit of agricultural production, and the crops and livestock production loss in the underdeveloped countries was equivalent to a loss of 6.9 trillion kilocalories per year. So that is also impacting. Okay, global food security relies on both sufficient food production and food access. Climate change, and we are going to see, is contributing substantially to food insecurity in the future by increasing food price and reducing food production. Of course, with electronics, and we are going to see later, it's very hard to, we can try to impact on food price, because food price depends a lot on the production, on the amount of food available. But electronic would also be very important for the food production. Water required for food production may become more scarce due to increased crop water uses and drought. And also we have here a great opportunity to see how we can improve the usage of water in the food production. And competition for land may increase as certain areas become climatically unsuitable for production. It will create migration. And we are seeing what is happening with migration today. In the last few days, and the last past day, we saw how many people die because of some problems of migration going to Europe. We have migration almost everywhere in the world. People are coming from the most affected areas to the less affected areas. So we are creating not only a problem about the food, but also creating a problem about the migration. So ensuring food security, some ideas they have: use water more efficiently, electronics, effectively electronics, combined with policies to manage demand, switch to less thirsty crops, however cultural impact change in food habits. This is very important, because when we say, let's, for example, we will see later that rice produce a lot of methane. Yeah, but there are a lot of countries, and there are a lot of people that they eat rice on a daily basis. So if we tell them don't eat rice, we are creating a cultural change that is not easy to do. So we have to be very careful on what we decide, on what we try to do. And of course, we have to improve the soil health. So now let's try to analyze a little on the specific part of the agriculture. What is the crop, the livestock, and fishery? What is happening? So background, agriculture and fisheries are very sensible to weather and climate. Agriculture relies on land, water, nutrients, and other natural resources climate affects. So how much the climate change will affect the agriculture depends on rate and severity of the change and adaptation of farmers. And it is something very important. It will also depend on the area you are living, because today with the change of temperature, what was produced, let's say, some time ago in Spain, it's now maybe produced in the Netherlands, because the weather are changing and we are heating the land. So there are places that are being affected, but other places are getting some benefit, because now they can produce their own food because of the rise of the temperature. So the climate change can affect several things: the crop, the livestock, the fisheries, the soil and water resource, the ocean, the rural communities, and the agricultural workers as well. So how did it impact on agricultural productivity? The condition can be better or worse depending on region. Just mentioned that. The air pollution also damaged crops, plants, and forests. Climate change can increase the threat of wildfires. And we have been talking on the climate change that a lot of wildfires that are producing. When you have a fire in a forest, you are also creating more emission of CO2. Temperature and precipitation change will expand the occurrence and range of insects, weeds, and diseases. And the kind of insect is very important, and not only insects, animals in general, because we can create I can tell you immediately a story. We were doing some measurements on lettuce, and we put 90 lettuce on the field, and we put sensor and all that. And 1 week after we started this experiment, we have only maybe 20 lettuce out of the 90. So what happened? Rabbits came there and eat the lettuce. So there is not only the insects, the weeds and disease, there is also all the environment, the ecosystem that is being impacted. There is less and less food for the rabbits. So they go there and they took our lettuce. Warmer temperatures and changing precipitation will also affect the plant's bloom and pollinators work. We can talk about bees, and it is a very important problem, what is happening with bees. Without bees, there is no food. There is almost no food. So bees or other pollinators are so important that, and I know that there is a good research from Professor Wei Jen Lee on bees, and they are putting some kind of device on the queen so they can know exactly what is happening with the bees. It was very interesting. He did a talk, a very interesting talk on that. Okay, so climate change will increase the frequency of heavy precipitation in some places of the world. That will create soil erosion and depletion of nutrients. Heavy rains increase runoff into oceans, lakes, and streams, and coupled with warming temperature, it can produce hypoxia in oceans, which kills fish and shellfish. Sea level rise will produce erosion, agricultural land losses, and saltwater intrusion. So it's something that is. Check out that. Okay. 1 second, please, because I was looking. Okay. So impact, make me sure that this is the right one. Okay, so impact on crops. Specifically on crop, the higher CO2 levels can affect crop yields. It is important to understand that for crops, there is an optimal level of everything, nutrients, water, and all that. Over irrigation is as bad as less irrigation. Over fertilization is as bad as less fertilization. So, and higher CO2 will also affect that. High CO2 reduce the protein and nitrogen content in alfalfa and soybeans. So we have a loss of quality. So we are producing the alfalfa and the soybeans, but we have less quality, so we have less proteins. Extreme temperature and precipitation can prevent crops from growing. Okay, and for example, well, one specific problem that is happening with the temperature is when you get these very freeze days at the beginning of the spring, when the trees are flowering. If there is 0 degrees when trees are flowering, you can be sure that you will lose your complete production. So today, what farmers are doing, they're putting big fans on the field to try to increase the temperature, to do not get to the 0 degrees at the flower level. But they are also looking, they have talked with me, do you have any kind of application to make it automatic? Because we have to measure temperature at a certain level. It's not the temperature on the soil, it's the temperature at 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters. So they have to measure that, and based on that, they have to run the fans. So they say, if we can do it in an automatic way, because sometimes it arrives in the middle of the night, so they have to be there waiting for the freeze. So that's another way of helping them. So droughts are a challenge in areas where rising summer temperatures cause soil to be drier. Weeds, pests, and fungi thrive under warmer temperatures, wetter climates, and increased CO2 level. And of course, high concentration of CO2 stimulate the plant's growth. However, it reduces the nutritional value of the food. So we can have a more production because of the CO2, but we have less quality. Livestock, heat waves increase livestock vulnerability to disease, reduce the fertility, and reduce the meat production. The drought may threaten the pasture and feed supplies. The climate change will increase the prevalence of parasites and diseases that affect the livestock. And of course, changes in veterinary practices, increased uses of parasiticide, increase the risk of pesticide entering the food. This is another problem. We are getting pesticide in the food. Increasing CO2 may increase also the productivity of pasture, but decrease their quality. Again, quality. So yeah, the livestock, we have a lot of nice grass to eat, but has less quality, so they will need more and more to balance the loss of quality. Fisheries, migration of species to colder regions. Temperature change affect breeding and migration cycles. Ocean acidification weakness the shellfish shells. This is very important. Acidification is coming in a lot of cases from the over-fertilization, because when you over-fertilize, you have the leakage of all these nutrients, or all these chemical nutrients going to the soil, and after, at the end, they will be in the ocean. Acidification modifies marine ecosystem structure that is also producing more problems, and we have less food. So what United Nations is saying, it is important to understand what the United Nations is saying, and I know that IEEE is doing it's doing some kind of work trying to participate more and more on this kind of discussion at the United Nations level, or even at the COP level. So humans have there is five key takes away from the last year report from United Nations. Humans have already transformed more than 70% of the first land area. Food systems are responsible for 80% of deforestation, 29% of greenhouse gas emissions, and are the single largest cause of biodiversity loss on land. Protecting and restoring the ecosystem could provide more than a third of the land-based climate action needed to meet global warming goals. And there, restoring ecosystem, protecting ecosystem, there is a lot of things we can do. Because of course, knowing what is happening, knowing how the land is, and so on, and this is based on electronics, sensors, system, artificial intelligence, we can help to protect and restore that. Land degradation threatens marginalized community the most. And this is very, very interesting, because those communities, they have been doing agriculture for centuries. I can give you the example I know from Latin America, the Peruvian, the Ras, the Incas did to do agriculture. That's very good. So they know how to restore and protect the ecosystem, but we are not listening to them. So that's another thing we have to start doing, is listen more the communities. And the world faces a stark choice between protecting and restoring the land and business as usual. Unfortunately, we are still at the business as usual. We have not made so many changes, so we need to work on that to move to the protection and restoration. So what electronics and technology can do, because we are we are electrical or electronic engineers, we know how to do things, we know how to do sensor, we know how to measure things. Well, what can we do? So the first thing, background, agriculture is major part of the climate change. It's almost 1/3. Some people say 28%, 30%, some others 35%, but let's put 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emissions. The percentage could rise substantially as other sectors are reducing their emissions. So agriculture is not really reducing their emissions because we are still at business as usual. And one important thing, and I come back to what I said, 80% of farmers have less than 2 hectares. So if we want to implement a lot of systems that we need to, we also have to do an important work on education. It's not only to produce the system, to produce the artificial intelligence that will help, we also have to educate people, educate farmer digital skills. Because farmers, I've been interacting a lot with them. They have what I call their ancestor knowledge, the knowledge coming from their parents and their grandparents and so on and so on. So if we arrive with a nice device and say, no, you don't have to irrigate right now, they will say, yes, I learned that from my father, he learned that from his father and so on. So I know that I have to do it now. Don't put so many fertilizers. Yes, I have to. So we have to have more connection with them. 1/3 of the food produced globally is either loss of waste and need to address food loss and waste. And this is a very interesting thing I found, I think a couple of months ago, that is coming from Catherine Sisson, CEO of Estrella Biotechnology. It was a workshop done by IBM. The carbon emission on food waste are greater than all transportation combined. Food waste is producing a lot of emissions. And there are people saying that we don't need to increase the productivity of food, we need to decrease the waste. They say there is enough food in the world. We don't need to increase, but we have maybe to better distribute or to do other kind of things so we can change that. And this is what we have to avoid, because it's this is the problem of okay, we have electrical car, but we are producing electricity from coal. So it's the same for agriculture. If we are going to implement a lot of systems and we don't have green energy, or whatever you want to call the green energy, the renewable energies, we are going to do exactly the same. So please, let's consider that when we are trying to develop systems. So one of the important parameters when we are talking about smart agriculture is low power. There is no energy source in the middle of the field. There is none. So you have to start looking for batteries and all that. But on the other hand, and we were discussing that yesterday with someone, is if you put sensor on the land, you have to think that my sensor and my system has to be working for at least 1 year. You don't need more than 1 year, because we are changing the crops on a yearly basis. It's not, they are not there forever. Every year we change it, we do things and all that. So the sensor, of course, sensor has to be sustainable. Biodegradable, biosensor maybe, or it has to be sustainable. So there is a lot of discussion also on that. Where the emissions are coming from, you see there, methane, manure, nitrous oxide, fertilizer production, etc. And 47% is land conversion to agriculture. When we are converting the land, when we are the forest and all that, and we are burning forests, as it is done in several places of the world, and most, I would say, in the Amazonas in Brazil, we are also creating problems. 47% of the emissions are coming from there. So how agriculture contributes to emission? We have deforestation, release carbon dioxide stored in trees and disrupt the carbon cycle I explained at the beginning. Burning of agricultural residues. That's another education problem. Normally the farmer, they just burn. Soil degradation and erosion due to poor agricultural practices. When organic matter decomposes, is released CO2. Livestock production. We're going to talk a little about that. Cattle produce methane through enteric fermentation, we know, and manure decomposition. The uses of synthetic fertilizers release nitrous oxide. The rice production is a major source of methane emissions, is the second one. No, I would say the third one. The first one is coming from energy. The second one is the meat, the livestock, and the third one is rice production. So we have to find ways to produce rice in a different way, or we have to be able to measure things. Use of agricultural machinery such as tractor and harvester is also contributing to that. Deforestation, burning of forest, decay of organic matter and loss of carbon sinks. So when forests are intentionally burned or cleared using the slash and burn technique, the carbon is stored in trees and plants, is released to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. That is very interesting also. It's the global land use for food production. So you see from the total surface of the earth, only 29% is land, the rest is oceans. From that 29%, only 71% is habitable. And from that, 50% is already used in agriculture. And that is the interesting part. 77% of the 50% is used on livestock. And only a small part of 23 is used on crops. However, the global calorie supply we need is coming mostly from crops, where we have less land. And same for the proteins, for protein supply, it's coming from crops, but we are putting more land on the crop, on the livestock production. And this is the greenhouse gas emission per 100 grams of protein, and you see the beef is the worst. I'm not saying that don't eat beef. No, we have to maybe reduce the amount of beef we eat, or maybe change the way we do the production. And you have the lamb, the tomatoes is also very important, and so on, so on. But also, it is important the food emission from production and the supply chain for the same kind of product. Beef, again, is the most important. And you see that the land usage on farm and animal feed is the most important part of the emissions. The supply chain, processing, transport, and packaging retail is small. So we have to tackle the production. There is this new initiative, the Climate Smart Agriculture, the CSA, aims to achieve 3 outcomes: increase productivity, more and better food to improve nutrition security, the enhanced resilience, reduce vulnerability to drought, pest, disease, and other climate-related threats, and reduce emission to pursue lower emission in food production. It is supported by the FAO Strategic Framework 22-2031. They are defining 4 betters: better production, better nutrition, better environment, and better life for all. Practices are context specific depending on local socioeconomy, the environmental and the climate change factor. We cannot apply exactly the same everywhere in the world. Implementation through 5 action points, expanding the evidence base for this, supporting the enabling policy framework, strengthening national and local institution. It is very important, national and local institution. Even if we can produce a very good technology, I don't know, in Europe, apply that technology in Africa is not just plug and play. There is a lot of considerations in South America, something like that. I have seen in Chile sometimes big companies arriving with very high solution, high technology solution, high cost solution, and they're not used by the farmers. They don't understand. And also, we have to talk the local language. It is very important if we want to work with farmers. So the enhancing funding and financing options, and of course, implemented practice at field level. So some examples, the climate smart farming and forestry, you see the drought, the yield less. So we can start trying to measure some solutions through the climate smart practices, reducing the farm emissions. We go to soil carbon storage, store the carbon, diversified system and knowledge exchange. And we also have to work on sensoring, measuring, and things like that, which is the solution for resilient farming and forestry. So the role of existing and emerging technologies in advanced climate smart agriculture through modeling. We have to have a model of hydrological model, climate model for crop. You know, I was doing a research, we show my part of my research in a couple of slides. I have not found a mathematical model for crops. I have been looking for that, and it is so complex. I have not found a model. I have been discussing with my friend Andrei Vladimirescu, who was one of the creators of SPICE, about that. And we were thinking, what about if we try to create a SPICE model for the land? Because, you know, the land can be considered sometimes a capacitor or sometimes a resistor. So what about if we can create this model and we can try to know what is going to happen? But it is so complex, and I will show you in a couple of slides. Artificial intelligence, how to apply artificial intelligence. It is very important in the crop, but not only in the crop. But one of the problems, when I started my research on that, so I was discussing with an agronomist, and I told her, it was a lady, I told her, yeah, I want to do some kind of measuring of the parameters of the soil to try to see about irrigation. So she told me, okay, what kind of crop you are going to use? I said, who cares? Tomatoes, lettuces, lettuce, I don't know. I said, no, you have to care because they are all different. So I say, okay, let's go for lettuce. And she told me, which lettuce? Because they are different. There are ones that need more water than others. The pH of the soil is different from this one to that one, the salinity and so on, so on. So it's not only a thing of measuring things, we also need to understand what we are going to measure and what will be the implication of those measurements. So remote sensing and GIS application also, but there is a cost issue there. For example, to measure the nutrients. There is 3 main nutrients that are used: the NPK, the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. How we measure that? So there is some technologies that are through optical consideration. So if you send light to the soil based on the reflection, you will be able to know which nutrient you need. but this is today working from satellites and drones, which is a little expensive for small farmers. Implementation step, so we have to work on water distribution and implant monitoring, so we can sense a lot of things. We can sense the root, the leaves, the branches, the trunk. There is a lot of kind of work that is being done today. My friend Danilo De Marchi from Politecnico Torino is measuring the impedance of the trunk, so trying to detect the health of the plant based on the impedance. I have been working more on measuring what is happening in the soil and so on. So there is this water distribution and implant monitoring. There is the plant interconnection, plant area network. And by the way, plants are already a network. They do some emissions of volatiles and they communicate. For example, if one plant is being attacked by a pest, it generates some kind of volatile compounds that will announce other plants I'm having a problem. So they already have this kind of plant area network. Cloud and data management is also very important, secure exchange of data. It will be very good for one farmer to know the production of the other one, so they can impact on prices and all that. That was my work, growth and health of plants. So you see there is a lot of parameters. I'm just taking some of them. So it's a very complex system and it depends on several physical and chemical parameters. So I have said the parameters are on the plant itself, the volatile compounds, the soil, and the environment. And so my research is now how we can find this model of growth, which is a function of these three parameters. So far, I'm able to measure some of them, but for example, the soil pH, I give you that as an example. I have found, because I want to measure the pH in the soil directly, real time. So this is not it's a non-aqueous environment. So I need to find a way to measure pH on the soil. And the way that is done today, you take a sample, you send to the lab, and they mix, it's 1 part of land per 5 parts of water, and they measure the pH, and they send the results to the farmer 2 days after. So it is important because pH will impact the way that the roots can take the nutrients and so on. Just one example, nutrients, I was already talking about that. So the main objective on crop is sustainable precision agriculture, optimize the use of nutrients and resources. Farmers in general, they just put fertilizer. They don't care what they need. They just put it because they know they have to put fertilizer. Improving the irrigation system. Yeah, we have the several systems that are doing irrigation. We have systems that are measuring the humidity of the soil. But if you don't measure other things, it will not work very well. Reducing the chemical treatment and pesticide, and inform stakeholder with alarm work. Less invasive system, we detect plant health and watering status, transfer the information, analyze and provide information to farmers, and real-time interaction between farmers and crops. It is very important, the real-time interaction. Sensor located on the plants and in the soil, device have to be flexible, transparent, self-powered, smart electronic system and artificial intelligence, implant communications transfer to the cloud. So we are using a lot of this kind of communication protocol like LoRa or Sigfox that are long range, low power. User-friendly interface, low power and low cost. This is very important, low power, low cost. Visual electromechanical sensor, image ripening evaluation. This is the volatile organic compounds emitted by plants, the ethylene. Every time a plant is emitting one of those volatile organic compounds, they are giving a message. So we have to analyze that and understand the message. The impedance sensor, the environment sensors, the light, the humidity, the temperature, nutrient, soil moisture, soil salinity, etc. The data function that combine plants and environmental data. Biosensor can be used to nutrition detection, can also be done through optical sensor, I already told, disease and pest detection, water quality monitoring, the salinity. Salinity is critical. The only way to remove the salt from the land is to clean the land. So you have to apply good water for a long time, and you have to clean, you have to wash the land. Pesticide residue detection as well. This is also very important. On livestock, sorry, on livestock, we have the direct source of how they emit. There's the direct source, the indirect source, the enteric fermentation. This is one of the most important, the manure management, and all the indirect source of emission, like land use change, livestock induced desertification, release from cultivate soil, and so on, so on, so on. There is a new way of working, which is called the precision livestock farming. It's an automated weighting system, low-cost feed and water take recording. Imaging, they use a lot of imaging. I have seen some system where they are trying to do some machine learning from sensors and cameras. So the idea is to sense something on the coast, meaning temperature, movement, and other things, and to have a camera and make a correlation between the sensor value and the camera and the action that you are seeing on the camera. And after that, with that, we can learn the system. That's the reason we are doing machine learning. So after we can remove the cameras that are more expensive and just work with the sensor. GPS tracking for extensive system. We are talking about kilometers here. Right? It's kilometers of land. Proxy technologies to measure methane emission, electronic identification solution, and so on, so on. What are the benefits and risks of this application? Better animal welfare and health, of course. Optimize input level and maximize production, reduction of the environmental impact, reduction of methane emission, more results in less land, so less deforestation. The risk, affordability, of course, price. The system failure may cause devastating effect, okay, because we can take decision based on that. Usage of intrusive tax may affect animal welfare. We are putting things on animals, we are putting tax or things like that. So this is the biological, so we can take the biological parameters. We have algorithm to do that, to predict data. And one of the things I have found the other day that I was doing a presentation about the metaverse and the smart agriculture. I have found a very interesting picture where, and it is true, it's not a joke. They are putting this kind of virtual reality glasses on cows, on the dairy industry. And they have found that showing a nice place to the cow increase the milk production by 20%. Is that ethical? I don't know. Is that the right way to do? I don't know. What is the impact for the cow? I don't know. So there is a lot of questions we can ask about that, but it's happening today. Okay, so we have this livestock farming system that is doing everything. Internet of Things related to dairy farming, the tail position, the abdomen movement, and so on. We are measuring a lot of things. We are measuring a lot of things, and even it is very interesting to dairy farming because the period where the cow can be pregnant, so they can produce milk after, is very short. It's 12 hours every 28 days. And in the poor countries, the way that the farmer knows that is by being there and look at the cow, how they behave and all that. So having all those sensors and all that is helping not also to improve the productivity, but we are also improve the quality of life of the farmer because they don't need to be there day and night under the rain and so on. So just to close on that, some brainstorming and discussion, I want to give you some ideas. COP27 that was last year remarked most of the carbon stock in croplands and grassland are in below ground plant organic matter and soil. So carbon accumulation at this site has a mitigation potential of between 0.4 to 8.6 gigatons per year. Agricultural productivity has declined by 21% compared to a scenario free of climate change. So agriculture is impacting the climate change, but climate change has impacted and has reduced and has declined the productivity by 21%. Factors like high temperature and extreme precipitation, high level of carbon dioxide. Droughts are responsible for 80% of losses in primary sector worldwide, according to United Nations. Agriculture accounts for 22% of all damage caused by natural disaster in developing countries. Smallholders farmers, the most vulnerable to climate change, account for 95% of farms and produce almost 80% of the world's food. And UN estimate that, United Nations estimate that 828 million people were going hungry in the world in 2021 and will continue. So this is also coming from UN, United Nations Secretary General. Last year, he said half of humanity is in the danger zone from flood, drought, extreme storm, and wildfire. No nation is immune, yet we continue to feed our fossil fuel addiction. We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands. And he has repeated that for the COP27. He has repeated something very similar speech. Something related to economy, it's very interesting. The donut economy, it's a theory from Kate Raywood. She wrote that in 2012. A lot of cities are starting to apply this kind of things, and it is related on the way we produce things also. And it's based on the planetary boundaries that were defined in the Stockholm Resilience Center in 2009. So you see the outside of the donuts is the planet boundaries. Inside of the donuts, we have the United Nations Sustainable Objective. And this is what is happening today. So we see that we already have 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries where we are in red. One is climate change, the nitrogen and phosphorus loading, the land conversion, the biodiversity loss. The others are not in red because we are not measuring them. It's not that we are good on that. No, we don't have any measurement for that. Those are the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations that I know that IEEE is also interested on that, and we have to, as technical people, as people working on technology, we have to help to work on that. This is another theory that is happening. The regenerative agriculture there is a lot of followers of that in the United States. It's replicate nature instead of constantly trying to overpower it. So they say minimal tillage, keep residue in soil, maintain a living root, crop diversity. This is also important, the crop diversity, because they are doing monocrop. So they are trying to put only one type of crop in a specific place, an integrated livestock, adds manure, terminate cover crops, and so on. A couple of announcements. There is a conference that we are doing. It's called CAFE, Conference on Agri-Food Electronics, that will be in September 25th to 27 in Torino. We already closed the paper. We are happy because this is the first year we do that. We got a good number of submissions. We are very happy of that. So if you are not submit this year, you can also attend the conference. It will be a very interesting one. And the best paper will be invited to this new journal. It's a new transaction on agri-food electronics. This is also very good. You can publish there all your work in this domain: precision agriculture, smart livestock, climate change, and global warming phases. So we are exactly on that domain. So this is a new journal that is sponsored by CAS, Sensor Council, Instrumentation and Measurement, and RFID. Okay, I think that's it. So I'm ready to any questions you would have, and I thank the organizing committee of this webinar series for the opportunity for me to talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. That was really great. Though we have so many questions in the Q&A and also on the chat, I'm afraid we are 11 minutes over time. So is it possible for you to just quickly go through the questions and probably answer one or two?
Yeah, so I can go to I'm going first to the chat to see if there is any interesting thing. Good. Okay. Post the question. Yeah. Exam presentation is being recorded, so it will be good. Access to the slide also. Yeah, I would send the slide to the organizer of this conference, but there is a record of this speech. So, but the slide, yeah, you answered. The slide will be available on the video. Okay, the QA. Okay, we need to take up measure and practical projects right from college vertical. So according to you, to tackle the climate change dilemma, what project should college student focus to make continuous effort to reduce climate change or reduce the drastic effect by it. I will say that we need to go in two directions. The first one is in college and even basic school and high school. We need to start teaching people what is carbon emission, where it is coming from, so they can act in a way that they can reduce the emissions or they can improve the way they work. So we need to do a lot of education on emissions, but we need to do also a lot of education on the impact of agriculture on climate change, because it's not only coming from farmers, it's coming from the waste of food and all that. So we need a lot of education, and I think we as IEEE, we can do a lot of work on that. And the second thing is to start teaching kids and all that. We can use Arduino and all these kind of things, all these kind of platforms, how to measure things. Because it's when you start saying, yeah, but you have to measure the humidity of the soil, or you have to measure this or that, sensors are available, some sensors are available. So it will be also very good for them to start understanding the process of crops, how they grow, how the temperature is changing in the soil, how the temperature of the soil is related to the environmental temperature, what is the transpiration of the plant, so you can start measuring the humidity of the soil and so on, that is impacting also is impacted by the temperature. So we can start having this kind of a small experience to college and high school and so on. So they start having I will say, they get conscious, they are conscious of the problem we have. Can autonomous robot contribute in climate change? Yes, they can. Autonomous robot, of course, they can contribute on that. The problem is that less than 2 hectares is a very small piece of land. So put autonomous robot on the small farm, it's not so easy. So we need to start working on this kind of robots or technology applied to very small farms. And on the other hand, people not having money. So we need also to start working with governments and all that to fund all this research and to fund the application of that. Okay.
Victor, Shinzia
Yes.
has given a question. So last Monday, FDA in USA approved the use of lab-grown chicken. Could you please comment on this potentially breakthrough news and on the implications in the impact on climate change?
Could you repeat the first part, please?
Okay. Last Monday, the FDA in USA approved the use of lab-grown chicken. Could you please comment on this?
Yeah, this is, for me, is an ethical problem as well. Yes, lab growing of crops, chicken or whatever will help a lot. This is sure. Do we need that? That's another question. Yeah, from a scientific point of view on emissions and all that, yes, it would help a lot. It's the same that if we start producing meat in the lab, it's exactly the same thing. Or the uses of greenhouses to have crops and all that. Yes, that will also help a lot. However, my question is from an ethical point of view and also from the future point of view. Is that sustainable in the time? Do we have enough knowledge about the implication of that? I don't. So yes, it's helping in the immediately. What is going to happen in the future? I think we need to investigate a little more.
That is brilliant. Thanks, Victor. Thank you so much. Ritambra ma'am, would you like to take over?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sharing your views on smart farming to manipulate and manage the agricultural yield using sensor and automatic irrigation system. So I think it reduces emission in livestock production as well to keep carbon store in the soil, which is really need of the hour. And so I really love to hear you, because what you precisely correlate the role of electronics in climate change, including agricultural sector, including including the water bodies and all. So thank you so much, sir.